I'm laying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to think what am I going to say about Pat Hagen this morning to get things started. Thanks, Pat. And here's what I decided.
I didn't want you to lose sleep over it.
Right. I think, like each of us, Pat has an interesting story to tell, and I'm interested in hearing it. And I know some parts of the story, and I guess I'm curious what you're going to choose to share this morning.
You don't know, do you?
I don't. But what I do want to say is this. I know that pastors are not supposed to have favorites, but Pat, I feel, is one of the boys. And one of the boys, by that I mean...
Is that good or
I'm going to tell you, Marion, we have a board of church properties that is really a great group. And as far as I know, we're the only board that eats a meal when we have a meeting. And we get stuff done, don't we, Pat?
Yeah.
And have a good time doing it. And one of the reasons why I was anxious to have Pat serve on that board is because Pat knows how to get things done. And I've appreciated that quality about you. And I've also appreciated the fact that given some of the experiences that you and I have shared, that we've become friends. And I'm anxious today to hear, there are a lot of, it's not that I can't say that about a lot of others in the congregation, but I'm anxious to hear what of your interesting story you choose to share. If there's not at least something about bass fishing, we'll have to see later. All right? We're all yours, Pat.
Now, if you do that after I'm done, that would be good.
I'm on it.
I'm sorry that was the last on the list and you all had to wait so long for me to get up there.
Save the best for last.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about history. And my calling, I can put that into a word like you did, Scott. Service. Service, service, service. I've served my whole life, whether it was with my neighbors, my friends, my congregation, the church, and my fellow employees that I worked with. Service was a big thing in my life. Do you all know what a DD-214 is?
Yep.
Can you give me your version of a DD-214?
DD-214 is a military form, Department of Defense. I think it's a personnel record.
It gives you a, it'll let you open many, many doors once you've fulfilled your service. And it gives a quick synopsis, if you will, of your service, what you did while you served, what accomplishments you made, what awards or medals you made, your conduct, and it also says how you discharge, which is extremely important. Without this document, the people that have served for your country, without that document, they can not get a college education supported by the government. They cannot get a GI loan, to get a house, to get a mortgage. There's many, many things. And you can't get any medical care. You're kind of left out in the pasture if you don't have that. So I wanted to bring that to your attention about the DD-214 because later on we're going to segue into that through the history of what I'm going to bring up. And before I get into this history, this has to do with Vietnam. And it was a period of time when our country was in turmoil. We had the flower children. We had a lot of rebellious things going on in our country, and we were in a very unpopular war. Terrible. When I served in Vietnam, you want to keep this in mind as I'm going through my history here, is that I was in country, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, from right around December 1967, and I was there till February 1969, so that was about 14 months, if my math is right. I'm going to start out by giving some highlights. It's very well documented, and I pulled this off the web. Starting back in January 1967, two North Vietnamese divisions operating out of the DMZ, that separates North and South Vietnam. And I'm sorry I could not get a map for you people. I tried, but somehow I couldn't get it to print out. It would give you a better understanding of the North and the South and the boundaries. Anyway, the DMZ separates the North and South Vietnam. There were two North Vietnamese divisions that launched heavy bombardments of their weapons, etc., on military bases south of the DMZ, which would have been in South Vietnam. These bases included, this place will come up a few times, Khe Sanh. Have you all heard of Khe Sanh? Probably not. The Rock Pile, Cam Lo, Dong Ha, Con Den, and Jo Lin. Those were some of the bases that we held. And they got bombarded very, very frequently. American forces began an operation called Cedar Falls, which is intended to drive the Viet Cong forces from the Iron Triangle. It's a 60 square mile area lying between the Saigon River and Route 13. Nearly 16,000 American troops and 14,000 soldiers of the South Vietnamese Army moved into this triangle. But they were encountered with no major resistance. Huge quantities of military supplies were captured over 18 days. There were 72 Americans that were killed, victims mostly of snipers emerging from concealed tunnels and booby traps. 720 Viet Cong were killed. The topography of the mountains, the hills, the soil, you didn't want to live there, let me tell you. It was very tough. On these hills, on the way up on these hills, I recall that rose bushes, you know what rose bushes are, where they got the prickly thorns coming out and all that. It was covered with that stuff. And I'll never forget that, because it just ripped your skin. In February 1967, one of the largest air mobile assaults that ever took place, there was 240 helicopters that swept over Tre Nang province, beginning Operation Junction City. The goal of Junction City is to destroy the Viet Cong bases and the Viet Cong military headquarters for South Vietnam, all of which are located in War Zone C. There was these different war zones, and again, I'm sorry I don't have a map for you. War Zone C, north of Saigon, and Saigon was in the very southern part of the country. Some 30,000 U.S. troops took part in that mission, joined by 5,000 men of South Vietnamese Army. And after 72 days, Johnson City ended. American forces succeeded in capturing large quantities of stores, equipment, weapons, and there was no really super large decision on the battle. In April, American attacks on North Vietnamese airfields began. The attacks inflicted heavy damage on runways and installations, and by the time of the end of the year, all but one of the North MiG's bases had been hit, and they flew the Russian MiGs. So we're combating also air war. Desperate air battles raged in the skies over Hanoi and Haiphong. American Air Forces shot down 26 North Vietnamese jets, decreasing the North's pilots' rate by half. That was very impressive. Their pilots weren't as good as ours. May of '67, in the Central Highlands of South Vietnam, Americans intercepted North Vietnamese Army units moving in from Cambodia. And keep in mind about Cambodia. Cambodia is another country right on the borderline of North and South Vietnam, and that would be like to the west. Let's see, autumn of '67 in Hanoi, as communist forces are building up for their Tet Offensive. And the Tet Offensive is what the Southeast Asians or North Asians, they have these holidays, and they're supposedly supposed to be religious holidays, and they go crazy is what they do. They go bananas. I didn't understand what their real religion of that was involved, but they call it the Tet Offensive. That took place. There was 200 senior officials that were arrested in a crackdown on opponents of the Tet strategy. Tet always took place towards the end of January. So now we're in mid-January 1968.
So you're there now?
Pardon me?
You're there now?
Oh, yeah.
Because you went in December of '67, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you for reminding everybody of that. Mid-January 1968, in the remote northwest corner of South Vietnam, the elements of three NVA divisions, that's the North Vietnamese Army, began to mass near the Marine base at Khe Sanh. So that's a place I told you to keep in mind, Khe Sanh. The ominous proportions of the buildup led the U.S. commanders to expect a major offensive action in the northern provinces. And towards getting into the last week or so of January that year, at 5:30 a.m., a shattering barrage of shells, mortars, and rockets slammed into the Marine base at Khe Sanh. 18 Marines were instantly killed. 40 were wounded. The initial attack lasted continuous for 2 days, non-stop. On the Tet holiday, which was the very end of January, the Viet Cong units surged into action over the length and the breadth of South Vietnam, and we're talking the whole country. In more than 100 cities and towns, shock attacks by the Viet Cong sappers and commandos are followed by wave after wave after wave of their troops. By the end of the city battles, 37,000 Viet Cong troops were deployed for Tet. Now that's a chunk of men, 37,000. And they sneak in. They know their country. They have tunnels, ravines. You don't see them come in. It's all a big camouflage, hide and seek deal. Many more had been wounded or captured, and the fighting had created more than 500,000 civilian refugees. Casualties including most of the Viet Cong's best fighters, political officers, and secret organizers. For the guerrilla, Tet is nothing less than, they thought it was going to be a big success for them, but it was nothing less than a big catastrophe for them because we were prepared for it. But for the Americans who lost, in that episode, lost 2,500 men. It was a serious blow to back home here, hearing about it in our men dying. It didn't go well with the American support. In February, over 1,300 artillery rounds. Okay, and keep that in mind, artillery. Over 1,300 artillery rounds hit the Marine base at Khe Sanh again, and its outposts more than on any other previous day of its lives. To withstand the consistent assaults, bunkers at Khe Sanh are rebuilt to withstand 82 millimeter mortar rounds. 82 millimeter mortar rounds, they're not really super big, but when they hit, they really put an explosive round, and it destroys bunkers, and it destroys, if you're within range, it'll take out your eardrums, your nose will bleed, etc. So they're very explosive. So let's see here. In March, Marines, and we talk a lot about Marines because we're kind of the front line. While the Marines waited for a massive assault, NVA forces retreated into the jungle around Khe Sanh. For the next 3 weeks, things were quiet out there around that base. A week later, massive search and destroy sweeps are launched against the Viet Cong. Remnants around Saigon, which is further south, and other parts of South Vietnam. In the hamlet of My Lai, that was a big story which probably rings a bell with you people.
Yeah.
U.S. Charlie Company kills about 200 civilians, although only one member of the division is tried and found guilty of war crimes, and that was Lieutenant Calley, if I remember right. The repercussions of the atrocity is felt throughout the Army. However, rare such acts did the benefit of countless hours of civic action that the Army did, and individual soldiers, and raise unsettling questions about the conduct of the war. We were trying to help these people, and then this outfit goes in and creates holy hell and destroys the village. You can't imagine sometimes what goes through our men out there.
it's mind-boggling. It's part of war. Without warning, a massive North Vietnamese barrage slams into Kazan. Again, more than 1,000 rounds hit the base at a rate of 100 every hour. So you're really pinned down. At the same time, electronic sensors around Kazan, our sensors indicated that the North Vietnamese Army troops were having movement, and we were forced to reply with heavy bombing. Speaking of bombing, well, I will go on to say this operation, but I used to physically see way up there would be a string of B-50 bombers during the day, dropping thousands of explosives, but they wouldn't go off. And I'd scratch my head. Why didn't they go off? They're not all duds, are they? They had a delay fuse in them. They were timed. At 2 in the morning, you could see a whole mountain blow up. And that's another thing you can think about too. Keep in mind that this 2 a.m. deal. Let's see. U.S. forces in April of '68, there was an operation that was called Pegasus. Pegasus finally retook Route 9, ending in the siege of Kazan. Kazan was a battle. It was nothing but an area of dirt, and it seemed like I don't know what the position was, but we had a supply depot there, and I guess that's why they were after it. Other than that, it was really nothing. Kazan had been the biggest single battle of the Vietnam War to that point. This is in April of '68. The official assessment of the North Vietnamese Army dead is just over 1,600 killed, with 2 divisions all but annihilated. But thousands more were probably killed by American bombing. The following month, with strong, highly mobile American forces now in the area, and the base no longer needed for defense, General Westmoreland approved to abandon that base and have it demolished. So we got in now through summer, now going into November of 1968. After 3.5 years, Operation Rolling Thunder comes to an end. In total, the operation had cost more than 900 American aircraft. And I thought I didn't mention this earlier. Operation Rolling Thunder it was an air support mission that gave air support to us troops, and they would go in and bomb and bomb and bomb. But those gooks kept crawling out of their holes and coming after us. Anyway, the campaign cost more than 900 American aircraft. 818 pilots were shot down that are dead or missing. 818. And hundreds are in captivity. Nearly 120 Vietnamese planes have been destroyed in the air from combat or accidents. Now I'm trying to put the ratio together here. We got 120 Vietnamese planes that have been destroyed,
yet we have 818 pilots that are dead or missing. I don't understand that. According to U.S. estimates, 182,000 North Vietnamese civilians were killed. 20,000 Chinese support personnel also have been casualties of the bombing. Going into January 1969, oh, my time is good. I've got till noon, right?
So 10 of ideally, between 10 of and noon.
Well, that's good.
Take what you need.
January 1968, as the war keeps going, President Nixon takes office as the new president of the United States. With regard to Vietnam, he promises to achieve peace with honor. His aim is to negotiate a settlement that will allow the 500,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam to be withdrawn, while still allowing South Vietnamese country to survive. I would certainly hate to be in his shoes, Nixon. And there are several reasons why I say that. In spite of government restrictions, President Nixon authorizes Operation Minion, the bombing of North Vietnamese and Viet Cong bases within Cambodia. We talk about Cambodia again. Over the following years, 4 years, the U.S. forces will drop more than 500,000 tons of bombs on Cambodia. And here we are trying to support Vietnam, and we're in Cambodia. And there's a reason for that. The North Vietnamese there was Ho Chi Minh Trail where they would go right down through the DMZ into South Vietnam. Well, we kept pounding that Ho Chi Minh Trail and busting things up for them, so they couldn't get their supplies down there. So they detoured and they went over to Cambodia. That's why we were fighting. They just wouldn't quit. So, anyway, it goes on to say now, towards the end of February 1969, in a major offense, assault teams and artillery attacked American bases all over South Vietnamese, killing 1,140 Americans. At the same time, the South Vietnamese towns and cities were also hit. The heaviest fighting is around Saigon. Again, Saigon was the southern part of South Vietnam, but fights raged all over South Vietnam. Eventually, American artillery and air power overwhelmed the Viet Cong offense. U.S. combat deaths in Vietnam exceeded over 33,629 of our men killed. And that was, we weren't out of there yet, and the war wasn't over yet, but that was the same amount that were killed in the Korean War. And that's a lot of men. President Nixon meets with South Vietnamese President Nguyen Van Thu on Midway Island in the Pacific, and announces that 25,000 U.S. troops will be withdrawn immediately, and he's trying to do this peace with honor deal. April of 1970, the South Vietnamese troops attacked into Cambodia toward
I don't know what I've got here. Pushing against the Vietcong. We jump into January 1973. North Vietnam and the United States resume peace talks once again. All warring parties in the Vietnam War signed a ceasefire. That was in January. March, the last American combat soldiers leave South Vietnam, though military advisors and Marines who are protecting U.S. installations remain there for the United States. The war is officially over. Of the more than 3 million Americans who have served in the war. I'm sorry. 58,000 are dead. 1,000 are missing in action. Some 150,000 of the people that served there were seriously wounded. Though they are still too weak to launch a full-scale offense, the North Vietnamese have rebuilt their divisions in the south and have captured key areas as we pulled out. President Nixon resigns, leaving South Vietnamese without its strongest advocate. In December 1974, the 7th North Vietnamese Army Division captures Dong Hai. And that's what I have on that portion of history. Oh, good. I'm doing good here. I can't believe this. I'm going to be here for 2 hours. Maybe we'll... I was going to totally omit this today, but if there's time, I'll talk about what I did after the service when I came back to the States, about my occupation, vocation. Now I'm gonna tell a story. Keep in mind we talked about a DD-214. I picked up an article here. This has to do with one of the battles there. One of the battles of many battles that went on daily. And this here was gathered by a fellow that his name was Robert Edelman, who studied the Battle of Hill 488, and he studied this at officers' basic training school. This guy that brought this to light, he went on to become a recon Marine before retiring as a lieutenant colonel. After serving his country, this guy went on to serve the nation's veterans, and one of them, Silver Star recipient, Chuck Bosley, had been a Marine Private First Class on the fateful night of 1966. So
anyway, this other guy here, Bosley, told Edelman about his recollections of that event, and intrigued Edelman to begin seeking out other members of this particular platoon that was in this battle. And this kind of gives you a little bit background before I go into this article. And we're talking about a guy by the name of Lance Corporal Ricardo Binns. Ricardo Binns did not really accept authority. He was kind of the guy in the corner that wanted to do things his way, and he wasn't really up front to follow orders from his superiors. And kind of a smart aleck, if you know. I'm going to use as gentle words as I can. Okay, so anyway, we have a local hero considered for Medal of Honor. On June 13, 1966, 16 United States Recon Marines and 2 Navy corpsmen, led by Staff Sergeant Jimmy E. Howard, made their way up a 1,500-foot bare-topped hill. I can't really pronounce this name. By the local Vietnamese. This hill was named 488. There were several hills in Vietnam with different nomenclature numbers, and you know, guys would ask you, were you up on Hill 320? Oh man, the stuff going on there, holy cow. No, I was on Hill 301. You were? Oh jeez, you know, and all of that. Plenty of battles going on with these hills. They were one of the teams from the 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, Marine Division, sent out, and one was dubbed Operation Kansas, an extensive reconnaissance effort designed to find the headquarters of the 2nd North Vietnamese Army near the valley of Quay Son Valley. Quay Son was another hot spot. That was a very popular place where you could go die if you wanted to. For the next few days, the Marines of Recon Team 2, what became known as Hill 488, dug in and reported enemy movement and called in successful artillery strikes on targets of opportunity in an uneventful mission. And that was their job. They were forward observers to call in fire missions. And that gets pretty scary, because you're far away from any support. On the morning of June 15th, 1966, Staff Sergeant Howard, despite concerns that the enemy, who by the accurate artillery fire falling on them, might know that they were under observation, and from where radioed back to his battalion commander, asking permission, get this, asking permission to stay one more night. Permission was granted. Unknowns to the Marines on the hill, the North Vietnamese did know where the observation post was and had begun mobilizing an attack on June 14th. The night of June 15th, a nearby Army Specialist Forces team leading a civilian irregular defense group patrol radioed a warning that they spotted a battalion of up to 250 regulars closing in on Hill 488. It was too late for the guys to get out of there, too late to evacuate. The men manning the observation post did what they could to improve their defenses and hunkered down. At about 10 p.m., a 20-year-old Marine Lance Corporal who enlisted in the Marines in 1963 and got off to a somewhat shaky start in the Marine Corps, volunteering for Vietnam, and then volunteering again to become an elite recon Marine, saw the enemy approaching and fired the first shots of the night from his M14 rifle. We've come a long way since the old M14. That was really I think I went through boot camp with an M14. Not the best. He fired at what he described was a bush, which was the enemy camouflaged with a bush around them, carrying it around. So he shot at a bush, and the bush collapsed. This was only a few yards away. The first of many combats to die that night. It was a battalion as anticipated, but a regiment, not just a battalion. A regiment is many, 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 many more men. Through the 18 men on the hill, they didn't know it at that time. They just thought it was a battalion. All they knew is that they were surrounded by aggressive, determined, well-forced training men that it seemed to have no end. They kept coming and coming and wouldn't quit. While Howard manned the radio, reporting on the action to the headquarters, requesting evacuation and air support, the Lance Corporal who come up the hill as a first team leader stepped up again to effectively serve as platoon leader, taking tactical control of the pitched battle, gathering his men into a fighting defense position around a huge rock outcropping so as to protect their leader, coordinating and relaying orders from Howard while taking continuous fire. For the next 7 hours, during which 6 members besieged platoon were killed and everyone else wounded in opening salvos of the battle. Lance Corporal Ricardo Binns rallied survivors, directing fire, passing around ammunition, tending to the wounded, as enemy soldiers surrounded their position, poured down a continuous rain of grenades and withering fire from heavy machine gun, 60mm mortars, AK-47s, and small arms. Overheard close air support aircraft circled helplessly, providing fire where they could. The enemy was just right on top of these guys, and they didn't want to fire and kill their men.
We used to have C-130s circle around us, and they would have gas-operated engines that would cover every square foot of a football field within 30 seconds. They had tremendous firepower, and they were very accurate. Once your pilot got dialed in the right bank angle, and they had their gunners go shooting out from the wing, the firepower was unreal. And we called them Puff the Magic Dragon. They saved us several times. Okay, so anyway, we're going on here. But unable to do so effectively as the enemy was too close to the embattled but tenacious Marines, with flares parachuting down from circling planes, which we called illumination. It would brighten up the area at night. Those few recon Marines repelled several coordinated attacks and relentless and continuous harassing fire. By early morning, the Marines were running low on ammunition, using captured AK-47s to continue the fight. They were out of grenades. They resorted to throwing rocks at the enemy. Can you imagine? Their will to live was unreal. So they started throwing rocks. And they're fighting the enemy at close quarters. This guy Binns, despite having been wounded by grenade shrapnel in both legs and having been machine gunned across his back, continued to rally the men, exposing himself countlessly. Taking on enemy fire while bringing the worst wounded to the least exposed positions and protecting the bodies of the dead. Returning the taunts of the enemy with seditious taunts of his own, which he was swearing and yelling at the enemy. A pair of helicopters attempted to land on the hill around 3 a.m. but were driven off by heavy fire. When daylight broke, the Vietnamese, now vulnerable to the air attack, dug in. During a brief, full lull in the fighting, a Marine observation helicopter flown by Major William Goodsell again attempted to land to get the worst of the wounded out and evacuated. But his craft was shot down and he later died of his injuries. Another helicopter offered itself as bait to draw enemy fire to the open, was also shot down, killing a crew chief, 2 other Marines aboard the helicopter, and desperately trying to come to the aid of the beleaguered platoon was also killed. Just before 10 a.m., June 16th, Company C, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines were landed on the south face of the old Fort 88. They were able to push back the enemy so that the wounded and the dead recon Marines could be evacuated, refusing medical attention until every member of his team was accounted for. Binns was the last to leave the hill. In the final tally, the 18 men on the hill, through that endless night, killed an estimated 200 enemy to the 6 men they lost. Binns credited with at least 30 kills. In the aftermath of the battle, Howard was promoted to gunnery sergeant and presented the Medal of Honor. He died in 1993 at the age of 64. Binns shoved off to a series of hospitals as he was badly injured. He was kept nearly in solitary confinement.
one of his 4 members of the recon platoon to be awarded the Navy Cross. The Navy Cross is the second highest award for value, and was given to 2 of them who died. 13 Silver Stars were awarded, 4 of them after they had died. Every member of the team was awarded a Purple Heart. This guy Benz, it was his second. Prematurely disabled by the wounds he had sustained on the hill that fateful night, Benz was medically retired from the Marine Corps in 1971 because of his troubles initially adjusting to the Marine Corps. He was given a general discharge. Can you believe that? His DD-214, we're going back to the DD-214, probably the most important piece of paper a military veteran who served honorably can own. Did not list his Navy Cross that he received. In the early 70s, a young Marine officer, Robert Adelman, this is the guy that researched all this, he went to serve the nation's veterans, and was a Silver Star recipient. Chuck Bosley had been a Marine private first class on that fateful night of 1966, and this Bosley guy told him about the recollections of the event on the 0488, and intrigued, Adelman began seeking out other members of the platoon officers that his documentation he could get his hands on, often resorting to the use of Freedom of Information Act because he was trying to get all this information, and he wanted to bring it to light, and he did. Real heroes are people like Benz. They have flaws. He wasn't a perfect Marine. He probably, because of that, and because of who he was, that he stood up and took charge, defying what most people would have seen as overwhelming odds. I don't think it's unreasonable that people who know about the compare the Battle of the Alamo, except that in this battle, American Marines survived. The more I learned about it, the more convinced I became that the only reason that they did was because of Benz. You people have a hero. You people have a hero in your midst, and very few of you know of it. And it goes on to say, what really upsets this guy who did the research was they gave this man a general discharge. A Marine who volunteered for Vietnam with 2 Purple Hearts and a Navy Cross. As an executive officer, I processed quite a few discharges in my time. And I never heard of the Marine Corps doing anything so callous. Ben's less than ideal conduct as a garrison Marine, he said, was partially to blame. Getting back to the DD-214, the Marine Corps rates every Marine on his conduct and takes away points for bad marks on your service record. To get an honorable discharge, you have to have a minimum of 4 points. If you only have 4 points within your tour of service, you're not allowed to screw up much. That's pretty marginal, because you are being observed and watched, and you don't know it. So anyway, so you have to have a minimum of 4 points. Ben's had 3.75. And like the Navy Cross, that shouldn't have mattered, but that medal wasn't even listed on his DD 214. And just keep that in mind while I finish, because I'm just about done. Because of less than an honorable discharge, Benz found it hard, once he was out of the hospital, to find a job. When he went to the VA hospitals for treatment needs, he was shuffled to the back of the line because he didn't have an honorable discharge. Back then, your military service meant something, and has less than honorable discharge slammed a lot of doors shut. Boom, right in front of your face. It took him 10 years of fighting bureaucracy to have his record and his discharge status upgraded to honorable discharge. This is what Adelman did for this guy. For 10 years, Rick Benz was denied even the recognition and privilege that comes with an honorable discharge and wearing the Navy Cross. The last sentence here is a more subtle reason for what Benz endured, he said, may have been the times, a period of national unrest as protests against the Vietnam War set cities across the country aflame. And the color of his skin, Benz, and the fact that Benz also refused to die. By looking at this guy Benz, there was a type of color on his skin, and if you looked at him, you couldn't figure out if he was black, white, Indian, Italian, or whatever. I'm going to wrap this up. I could talk another couple hours here, but I'm not going to do that. We'll do that on another path, another time. We talked about a DD 214. After my tour in Vietnam, I was stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, in March of 1968. I became a safety NCO officer, so I could have authority in checking the military guns for training exercises. On one occasion, did I start this out or was saying this is not on my DD 214? What I'm saying? It's not on my DD 214. On one occasion, I was observed by the commanding general of the base during a shoot exercise with the big guns. If you haven't figured this out, and maybe I didn't bring this up, but my military occupation was the number was 0811, and that's artillery. I fired big, huge guns. So I was under observation, not to my knowledge. this gentleman was checking me out. So we were doing a shoot exercise, and he thought I was an excellent example of how a Marine should be, and with my actions showing leadership and having my fellow Marines follow my lead. I received a letter of what he observed. This is what's called a meritorious mass, and it's a letter of high commendation. And this letter, whenever something like this happens, is posted on the base. I really didn't have any knowledge of it until somebody told me about it. I was weapons instructor while stationed at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I gave several seminars that I gave to teach the young recruits about weapons they might be assigned to. So I was a weapons instructor. This duty kept me from going on another cruise, going down to the Virgin Islands around by Cuba and stuff, where we would do war games and extra. Going back to Vietnam, I was in country from sometime in December of '67 through February of '69, which is approximately 14 months. While I served in Vietnam in the artillery battery, and when I say battery, it's not a flashlight battery. Batteries consist of minimum of 6 huge artillery pieces, and I was with some of these batteries where there was 18 instead of 6, and it depended upon location of the country and what operations were involved in, and how much firepower was needed. Each military weapon, each artillery piece had different functions, which did different things. So the applications of the missions were very flexible. Let's see. While I was serving in Vietnam, the artillery battery, where I spent most of my tour duty, which I was assigned to, had 6 guns. And this unit that I was with was part of the FMF, which is Fleet Marine Force, the 3rd Battalion, 11th Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division. Our unit did receive a Special Commendation Award for participating in well over 250 military operations, over 250, giving huge firepower support with high explosive military rounds. The recommendation that was given was the Presidential Unit Citation for valor far above and beyond expectations. While we were under attack and still performed the mission day in and day out. We had fire missions daily, day and night. And every night at 2 a.m., boom. I also spent time in Laos and Cambodia, which I'm not going to talk about. My tour there was 365 days plus 49 days, which comes to a total of about 414 days, of which the first 90 days that I was there in country, my orders were to guard the high commanding generals of the 1st Marine Division near Da Nang. So I did not get to my artillery unit for almost 3 months. If you do the math on that, through the 250 major military operations that we supported, our fire missions were 1.5 each day and every day while I was there. We normally have an 8-hour day here. Over there we had a 16-hour day. I will not answer any questions. Some other time I'll talk about my success after I got back to the States.
You've given us plenty to think about today, and as I look at this room, you talked about a time in your life and in each of ours that it is valuable for us to consider once in a while, because of the time that it was in our country, here at home, and also to be aware of the sacrifices that men and women, you included, made on our behalf in a war that was not well supported at home. And I am from time to time given pause. How is it that the Prince of Peace can say in a word something about what it is to serve like you did? Greater love has no man than this, but that he laid down his life for his friends. We appreciate very much what you shared with us today, Pat, and the much greater service that you provided on our behalf. And I'd like to hold you to that last comment about more to share. Second time around. Pat, all we can say is thank you again. No class next week on Easter.
Eat breakfast.
We'll eat breakfast and go home and have some ham or whatever. And then the following week, Amy will start with the Bible study on John.